So mandatory evacuations are in place for 8 counties along Florida's east coast. As you look at the devastation that we just saw from David's piece in the Bahamas, a hurricane warning has extended to about 180 miles off of the coast of Florida.
According to forecasters, Dorian is also projected to approach South Carolina and Georgia as a major hurricane, despite some weakening of the storm.
So for more on this, we want to bring in Mark Strassmann. He's in St. Augustine Beach, Florida. Mark, the conditions don't look terrible right now, but we know that that could change very, very quickly. What are you hearing? What are you expecting?
Well, in fact, Vladimir, it changes almost every 15 minutes. Just a few minutes ago, we had these slashing rains coming at me, and with winds that were in probably 30 miles an hour, it would be my guess. It picks up the sand and the bits of shell, and it lashes up against you. You can feel it. I could actually feel it through my suit. I'm going to show you the ocean, too. This is the Atlantic, of course. Waves probably 3 to 6 feet above normal. High tide is still a couple of hours away. These waves are only going to get bigger. This beach is also deserted. It's not only the mandatory evacuation order that's having an effect, it's basic common sense. It would not be comfortable to stand out on the beach with all the stinging rain. So people know that today is the day to hunker down. Whatever Dorian has in store for this east coast of Florida, it's going to happen today. And so people, if they decided to stay put, if they decided to ignore the mandatory evacuation order, they're indoors. They're either watching their TV or looking out the window, but they're not out here. The only people out here you generally find are TV crews and police officers in their cruisers making sure that everything stays okay. And so far, we've not seen reports of widespread flooding, widespread damage, anything like that. We basically have tropical storm force conditions out here. And the hope, of course, is that it doesn't get any worse.
You know, sometimes when it comes to predicting the movements of these sort of storms, the predictions change, right? You know, just a few days ago, there was a thought that maybe it would hit the West Palm area. It didn't happen. And so sometimes people don't take the forecast seriously, and they sort of take on a wait-and-see approach. How seriously are people taking the evacuation orders where you are?
Well, if they didn't get the message, it's because they weren't trying. I mean, this has been such a slow-moving storm. It's been on, they've had these warnings for days now that this storm is on the way. My sense of it yesterday was people, residents, not as seriously as you might think if you weren't from here. I mean, I know from covering these storms that some significant percentage of Floridians who live here, you know, they're all amateur storm trackers in their own right. They think their forecasts are more accurate than the professionals, and by and large, they ride it out at home. So yesterday, there were a number of people out at the beach. Today, that is not the case. So if they're not ready, really, they should be. But the good news, at the very least, is that if they did ignore the evacuation order, they are indoors, at least right now, for the worst of it.
So for those evacuating, Mark, where are they headed?
Inland, Vlad. I mean, inland, friends, family, if they can. In some cases, hotel rooms. You know, with these big evacuations, these mass evacuations, migrations of people inland, a lot of times you have to go a long way before you can find a hotel room. And so that figures into the calculus, too, for do I stay, do I go? I mean, where am I going to go? If you have family, friends who happen to live inland and are happy to see you in a situation like this, great, you've got a good option. But if you don't, you have fewer options, and I think that also plays into why some people decide, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice, ride it out at home. I'd rather go through whatever is going to come my way than drive inland, not knowing where I'm going to sleep and worrying about what's happening to my house.
So then, you know, what are authorities sort of most concerned about? Are they concerned about the people who have stayed behind and whether or not they're going to have to rescue them? Or are they concerned about storm surge and sort of, or shore erosion? What's the biggest one?
Emery, you hit on both of them, I think. I mean, they're worried about some of the people who stay behind, particularly, I mean, this is Florida. A number of these folks are elderly, right? So here in St. Augustine Beach, for instance, they have a checklist of elderly residents. They've been going door to door the last couple of days, police officers, trying to figure out, are you going to stay or are you going to go? And if you're going to stay, are you all set? With food, provisions, making sure that you're going to be comfortable for a couple of days. And then they also know who they have to check on today, tomorrow, and the next day to make sure that they got through this thing okay. And then on a bigger picture, they're worried about, storm surge coming in. I mean, there have already been breaches to some seawall that's about, I'd say, a 10-minute drive south of here. After Hurricanes Irma and Matthew over the last 3 years, they built up these storm barriers. There are these huge rocks, and then there's also some lower berms that are made out of sand and stone. some of those sand and stone ones had already been breached yesterday, and this is only going to get worse today. I think some of those neighborhoods are going to get flooding. There's no question about that. The question is, how significant is it going to be? The good news, I think, is that this storm, as powerful as it is 90 miles offshore. So we're not getting a hurricane force here. We're getting a tropical storm force impact here. And that is the good news. Whatever happens here, it could have been a whole lot worse.
Yeah, that is a silver lining. Certainly our thoughts and our prayers will be with our fellow citizens there in Florida and across the coast there, Mark. But thank you for your reporting. We'll check in with you a little bit later throughout the course of the day.
Okay, guys.